A pleasant morning to one and all gathered here in this online platform. I, on my behalf and on behalf of the Department of English, welcome you all to the day one of this virtual national conference on the story, life narratives of experience, memory, identity, and agency organized by the Department of English, Christy Jayanti College. Let's begin with the session one on testimonies as social history, which is to be delivered by Dr. T. Marx, Professor, Department of English, School of Humanities, Pondicherry University, Puducherry. Dr. T. Marx has 20 years of rich experience in teaching and is also an avid researcher. He has completed his BA, MA, and PhD from Manonmaniyam Sundaranaar University, Tirunelveli, Tamil Nadu. His areas of specialization include drama, comparative literature, subaltern studies, and translation. He has to his credit 30 publications in both national and international peer-reviewed journals and has also authored 14 books both in English and Tamil. He has successfully completed 4 PhD scholars and is presently guiding 6 scholars. He has organized various conferences and e-workshop in Pondicherry University in the last 10 years and has a lot more credits in his resume. Sir, it's an honor to have you amongst us for this virtual national conference. It's my pleasure to welcome you, sir, for this session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the warm welcome note. It's my pleasure to be part of this webinar on story, the history of experience, memory, erasure of history, construction of memory. It's a very important topic in the present scenario, and I'm happy to be part of this event. And once again, I'm thankful to the organizers, and I feel honored to have been invited to deliver a speech in this event. I have given the topic for today's session as testimonios as histories. Because when you talk about, when I found the topic for the event, which had some key terms like history, memory, the story, which is ironically or which is euphemistically referring to the histories. So this kind of certain theoretically charged key terms I could find in the topic of the webinar, and hence I have decided to talk about testimonios. So when we talk about testimonios, we should first and foremost differentiate between the autobiographies in the traditional sense of the term, or autobiographies that we found in our textbooks as when we were students. For example, M.K. Gandhi says the my experiments with truth. And of late, when we become teachers, we found an altogether different form of genre called testimonial, which is again a kind of autobiographical writing, but then the critics and the scholars do not tend to call these autobiographical writings as autobiographies in the traditional sense, where writings of the self. So this kind of self-writing, or a kind of subjective account of historiography, can be referred to as autobiography. But then when somebody writes about the history of a larger group of people from a personal perspective. When they convert their personal into political, then certainly that autobiographical writing becomes testimonial. So this kind of the difference with which we approach the testimonials today, and when we trace the evolution of this kind of a genre called testimonial, I take you back to the 1960s, where you have an important shift in the history making process. I mean, in the writing history or the production of history. So for the very first time in the 1960s, a path-breaking essay got published. It was with E.P. Thompson. His influence. It was only with his influence, the experience and culture of the masses were considered as essential categories of history writing. So this is a very important point in the history of self-writing, in the history of testimonials. So in the 1960s, with his influence, these two terms, the culturally charged terms, experience and culture of the masses, not of the elites, were considered as essential categories of history writing. It was E.P. Thompson's essay, History from Below, which was published in 1966. That's why I told you, it all started in 1960s, not before that. So in 1966, it was E.P. Thompson's essay, History from Below, which brought the phrase, historiography, or brought the phrase, the subaltern historiography, or common man's experience, or layman's experience to the forefront of historiography, as we already started acknowledging that the very fact of, or the very crux of new historicist movement, that there is no history, but there are histories. History or historical account cannot be singular, but only be multiple. So there are versions of historical accounts of the historical accounts of a given socio-political situation or a geopolitical space. You can't have a singular, authentic, official history as such, as we believed in the past. So we started acknowledging, we started realizing, we started sensitizing ourselves that there is no, or there can't be any singular history, but only histories. And of late, after accepting the fact that the history or histories can only be plural and multiple, we have accepted the next important thing, that it is no more history, it is a historiography. So along with E.P. Thompson, because you find an altogether different kind of a text, history from below for the first time in 1966. Prior to that, you know full well that all kinds of histories were history from above, a kind of eagle's point of view of history, eagle's point of view of what happened in the past. But for the first time, there is an essay, written by E.P. Thompson, that is titled as "History from Below." So it is not an eagle's point of view anymore. It is an earthworm's point of view. As you find in the postmodern parlance, truth, there is no truth, but there are truths, because reality is relative, and you have more and more versions of the same kind of thing. As you have the mainstream version of Ramayana, saying that Ravan kidnapped Ram's wife Sita, and Ram waged a war against Ravan to rescue his wife. This is the official, authentic, mainstream, singular historiography that we have been accustomed with, and we have been conveniently listening to for ages. But then the history from below gives a lot of alternate versions for the same mainstream version, that Sita was narrating the same kind of story from her own perspective, as we find in K.R.S. Iyengar's Sita Ayaniyam, and where Sita was, when Sita was asked to enter the ordeal of crossing the holy fire, she says, she readily accepts, yes, Ram, we will. I'm ready for crossing this holy fire to prove my chastity and integrity. But then let us join hands and cross the holy fire together, because what is the guarantee that you remain so, with integrity, that because you were also away from me for a longer time. So this kind of a feminist interpretation, or a feminist perspective, or a subaltern marginalized perspective, is also available. And on the other hand, you have Dash take Shurpanaga by Boyles and Gupta, where Shurpanaga was trying to interpret the same mainstream text from her perspective, that Mr. Ram, I just proposed my love for you. I expressed my wish. I expressed my desire. You can very well accept it, or you can reject it, but you have cut my nose, and I am now suffering a lot psychologically and physically. And as a brother, Ravan takes revenge upon Ram for this, and it's all Ravan's point of view, Sita's point of view, Shurpanaka's point of view. All these points of views or histories from below, which and along with this great E.P. Thompson, it was Eric Hobsbawm, George Root, and Christopher Hill, and many others started emphasizing the role of the disenfranchised. So the disenfranchised, the oppressed, the poor, the non-conformists, the atheists, third gender, sex workers, the visually challenged, the disabled, and otherwise marginalized groups in the history-making process. So this is the first time that you find a group of scholars emphasizing the role of the marginalized groups in the history making process. It's not getting them the voting right. It's not getting them their basic rights. It's not getting them their right to public space. It's not getting them their right to assemblies by way of reserving certain constituencies. It is something very significant, I would say, that it is not getting them their right to drink water in public well, or it's not fetching them their rights, their constitutionally guaranteed rights. It's something beyond that. It's something over and above all these things, that emphasizing the role of common people, the marginalized sections of people in the history making process. Can you just imagine a history which was considered something very pristine, something very divine, something very great, and something very much power centric, was brought down to the marginal groups, that you too can take part in the history making process. So a people's history, or history from below, is a historical narrative from the perspective of a common man, from the perspective of a layman like us, like you and I, and rather than elites and leaders. So long a period we have been used to read all kinds of history from the authentic, the so-called authentic, authoritative, official, history writers, historians. Now there is no historian at all, because everybody takes part very much actively in the overall, in the total history making process. So for the first time, a people's history it's very thrilling to use the very phrase people's history. So a people's history or a history from below is the same kind of historical narrative, but not from the perspective of historians or leaders or elites or the scholars, but from a common man, from a layman. And when you trace the history or when you weave the history of people from people, then you do not have a kind of you know yardstick like sticking to truth and facts and cross checking the facts. Nothing of that sort. It is it can be done only in the form of riddles, in the form of anecdotes, in the form of bedtime stories, in the form of certain tales, grandma's tales, and all such things. So whatever a person recollects from the memory, here is where the actual role of memory comes into the process of history making. So memory is something very, very, very significant when it comes to the people's history, not in the traditional history making process. One should remember that, because an official historian was writing history from his own perspective. He selects historical events, and he leaves some of them very conveniently. He filters history and he provides history to cater to certain sections of the society or of a historical you know point in time. So this is not to be treated as an isolated shift in the field of history or literary studies, but this shift towards the sub all 10 has happened simultaneously in all spheres of knowledge. So what I am trying to say is this: what you call today as memory studies or cultural memory studies, or making use of one's memory to weave history or historiography, or filling the gaps that exist in the official, authentic, the so-called official, authentic history, is something not all of a sudden that had been there over a period of time, as you find in most of the fields, not only in the field of history or literary studies. When you talk about the unheard melodies, heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter. The term unheard is something which comes from below. It's not the roaring of a lion. It's not the barking of a dog. It's something very different, which you never admire. It's the chirping of the bird, and it's something, the invisible voice that comes to the forefront. So the sub voices, what you call today as speakers, when you have home theater system and all such things, people who use this home theater system can easily understand that the bigger box type of speakers can be made very effective and can be enjoyed only with the small, very, very, very micro level speakers, what you call fetus. So this kind of the invisible voices, that come to the mainstream, or that moves to the mainstream, that is much more important. And in the field of science, we don't bother about, or we don't tend to talk about the atomic structures anymore. We have been into the subatomic particles. Not We are not bothered about the atomic particles anymore. And when it comes to psychology, the field of psychology, we don't really tend to discuss the consciousness anymore, which has become the prime subject of discussion for sadhus and swamijis and monks. The real psychologists are least bothered about what you call consciousness. It is these people have started talking about, or focusing on, subconsciousness. So the historians, as you find in the field of literature or in the field of creativity, as you have the unheard voices, the unheard melodies, and in the field of sciences, you have subatomic particles, and in the field of psychology, you have subconsciousness. In the field of history also, the main history has lost its credibility in a post-truth world where truth is, I mean, lies are masquerading as truth. So this kind of all kinds of lies or facts in a very attractive manner, camouflaged as truth and being circulated. At least in earlier times, there were distortions of facts, there were distortions of reality, there were distortions of truth. So when somebody says a truth part of it, I mean 50%, they'll mix lies with truth and they'll make it appear as truth. Now it is not there in post-truth world, a complete 100% lie is being circulated as absolute, 24 karat truth. This is the problem with the present state of affairs. So in the history making process also, nobody bothers about the mainstream primary history anymore. It is an era of sub histories, history that comes from Facebook posts, history from the social networking platforms, history from micro short videos presented by people from the field, from the spot. So this kind of history requires a very strong memory, and this kind of a memory filling the gap that existed in the official historiographic process is what has emerged as memory studies today. So the predominant finding of the India-based or the South Asia-based subaltern studies group is that there is a thick, not a thin veneer. There's a thick veneer that separates the elite from the subaltern. And while the elitist activities were recognized as political, the subaltern activities were generally disregarded by historians as primitive. This is the problem with the authentic official mainstream historiographers, the historians. The same way you find I'll give you an example. When the elites indulged in a social rebellion, the historians would brand it as a protest. Whereas when the peasant and tribals protested, they brand it as social unrest. So this kind of a differentiation in terms of christening something, naming something, is a matter of concern today. So because these marginalized groups did not follow the established rules of politics, like if you want to say, for example, if you want to protest against something, if you want to resist a hegemonic act, if you are a party member, the if you are a college teacher, for example, if you want to go on a strike, the procedures to be followed, and you do things accordingly. But in the case of a peasant, the marginalized groups, they did not know, or they do not follow the established rules of politics, like writing officially to the state machinery, negotiating with them, then going on a protest. So historians, seeing these things, historians dwarfed the very, very violent protests of peasants and tribals, very organized protests of peasants and tribals, ascribing them purely to economic motives, which is not true. So the kind of uprisings, are not to be treated as unpolitical, as they stake precise claims over authority, and the authority of landlords, local moneylenders, usurpers, and all these local thugs. That is why even the project of nationalism had been a middle class affair. It's not a people's affair. The leadership of the nationalist movement used the strength of mass mobilization on one hand, And on the other hand, it used the movement to check, to keep militant, the subaltern or marginalized militancy in check. This is what exactly happened in the case of the nationalist historiography also. So the very initial, or the very first place where I would like to insert my very first text for reference as a memory text, or an important text where, when there was a very rigorous conflict going on between the erasure of history on one hand, and the construction of memory on the other hand. So I keep my point of contention over this pedestal, wherein it's only a binary, and this binary is a very serious binary, where on one hand the state, the hegemonic forces are trying seriously to very subtly, sometimes very overtly, sometimes very covertly and ideologically trying to erase the history of the marginalized people, minority people, racial minorities, cultural minorities, and then historically deprived groups. And on the other hand, the same subjugated masses, the same marginalized groups of people, culturally marginalized, economically weaker, historically deprived sections of people were struggling to construct their memory in the form of weaving tales, in the form of uh, constructing statues, constructing busts, and all kinds of naming their children after their leaders. So by one way or the other, these people were struggling a lot to retain their history, knowing fully well that their history will be completely erased by the power center, by the hegemonic forces. One very prominent example where a small girl was trying very hard. She was struggling a lot to retain her history of subjugation, retain her history of excruciating experiences in the form of an autobiography, in the form of a diary. I hope you would be very familiar with this diary, the diary of a young girl by Anne Frank. So where I don't want to get into that diary, because almost every one of us would have read the diary of a young girl, fully well. So I would like to read only one paragraph from that specific diary. I want to recollect that from the diary of a young girl by Anne Frank, where she was trying to she was trying to speak about the very essence of being a Jew in Germany. So she says our freedom was severely restricted by a series of anti-Jewish decrees. Jews were required to wear a yellow star. Jews were required to turn in their bicycles. Jews were forbidden to use streetcars. Jews were forbidden to ride in cars, even their own cars. Jews were required to do their shopping between 3 and 5 p.m. Jews were required to frequent only Jewish-owned barber shops and beauty parlors. Jews were forbidden to be out on the streets between 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. Jews were forbidden to attend theaters, movies, or any other forms of entertainment. They were forbidden to use swimming pools, tennis courts, hockey fields, and any other athletic fields. They were forbidden to go rowing. Jews were forbidden to take part in any athletic activity in public. Jews were forbidden to sit in their gardens or those of their friends after 8 p.m. Jews were forbidden to visit Christians in their homes. They were required to attend Jewish schools and a lot more. You couldn't do this and you couldn't do that, but life went on. This is how a prematured young girl, Anne Frank, had recorded her excruciating experiences, where it is not absolutely self-writing, because she was not traveling inwards to speak more about her psychological ambitions or psychological disturbances, or what you call she was not exactly writing her experiments with the truth. She was trying to represent, a whole race. She was trying to represent the experience that was encountered by a larger group of people. Almost all young girls belonging to that specific geopolitical space would have certainly experienced what was experienced by Anna Frank. Only in this connection, I bring this specific text into my testimonio as history lecture, because she was not, while tracing her own personal, it becomes political. This is the place where this is the junction where history meets memory, and memory helps retaining history, or weaving history in the right sense from a layman's point of view. It was Gayatri Chakravorty's Spivak, to her essay, Can the Subaltern Speak, raises some serious concerns when it comes to historiography. Number one, romanticization of trivial marsh uprisings or a plenty in the so-called authentic, authoritative, hegemonic histories. She argues that these historians, nowadays we don't use the term historian, these historians, the traditional historians, had assumed that all forms of resistance and popular action had an emancipatory potential, which is a blatant misrepresentation on the part of the historians. For example, she herself has cited the problem of sati in India. There is a wonderful work down south where Gokila, a Tanjore girl who belongs to the Brahmin community, she was married to a boy because it was a child marriage, and after some time her husband passed away, and she was supposed to be thrown into the funeral pyre, and this Gokila was about to be thrown to the funeral pyre. Lord Littleton, a British general of that specific, uh, locale, he was visiting that place and seeing this injustice happening to a young girl called Gokila. He was riding his horse and he picks up Gokila, rescues her from that unfortunate moment and unfortunate situation, and he gives life to Gokila. And Gokila, after the passing away of Lord Littleton, she embraced Christianity and she renamed herself as Clarinda, and she was, propagating the gospel down south. And you find a lot of churches named after Clarinda in South India. This specific historiography, as Gayatri Chakravorty argues, these history writers or historians assume that this kind of a trivial resistance or popular action had always an emancipatory potential, which is not true, because the problem faced by Clarinda or Gokila was not the problem of all Indian women, because sati existed only among 3% elite community across India, and it was not the problem of the rest 97% of Indian suppressed, oppressed women. So this kind of myth needs to be exploded when a historian believes in such a thing. Secondly, the historians' attempt to represent subaltern resistance was itself an act of discursive power. The subaltern historians' assumption of the right to speak for the press. This, we have been discussing a lot. When somebody assumes the right to speak for somebody else as they couldn't speak, is again a kind of elitist tendency. It's an act of condescension that since they couldn't speak, you can speak for them. This kind of an act of discursive power is also to be dismantled or contested. Thirdly, Spivak praises the male bias of subalternist research, because the leading members of the collective, the subaltern studies group, were all men who often ignored the life experiences of subaltern women, which is also true. And absolutely in all kinds of discourses related to history, related to memory, there is an elitism in the whole process of history making, be it nationalism or capitalism, subaltern voice, all kinds of movements, Marxism, capitalism, nationalism, racism, wherever or whatever ism you talk about, there is a sense of elitism in every ism, and the people always glorify the eagle's point of view. They do not bother anymore about the earthworm's point of view. So this is an important problem of the history making process when you talk about when we talk seriously about you know testimonials or history writing or the stories. So stories are not stories anymore, because through stories we make the personal highly political. So when we talk about this testimonial, it was Slaughter who was stating something about Bildungsroman. Bildungsroman, you all know the meaning of the term Bildungsroman. You all know what we mean by Künstlerroman, which has its antecedents in the evaluation of the 18th century novels in Germany, and which came to fruition in England during the Victorian period with the works of Charles Dickens and George Eliot, where you find the childhood tracing the childhood experiences, or it relates an individual's development from childhood, a growth from childhood to maturity within a given social order. But then that is not my concern. My concern is with regard to this next problem of the same Bildungsroman and Künstlerroman and autobiographical writings, where you are trying to recollect your past, your childhood memories, and you are trying to filter those memories. Because when one talks about oneself, when one tries to write about oneself, I'm damn sure that one will not be talking about the morbid, will not be talking about the disgusting side of one's childhood and young youth. When you come of age, you don't talk about the hidden side of the darker side of yourself. You will try to filter your memory, and you will try to censor your memory, and you will write only about the positive, very progressive side of yourself. And even when you talk about the darker side of yourself, you may require, or you may invite the sympathy or empathy of the readers, or keeping those things in mind, you will weave your history accordingly. With some probable exceptions, I don't deny that. So it is the scholars identify two different, as you find in this COVID-19 virus, certain strands. There are two different strands which the scholars are seriously talking about: the idealist version of the same genre and the realist version of the genre. The idealist version of the genre is having a much more dialectical relation between the individual and society, one in which both are malleable, and the individual has sufficient initiative to transform the existing social norms even as he or she comes to maturity. But in the realist version, the individual has no agency at all to change the society, but achieves wholeness by adapting to existing social mores and structures. So the narrative, takes us through the protagonist often arduous, agonizing journey, both physical and psychological. I'll give you just two examples to understand these two versions. The idealist version of self-writing is exactly what is glorified in the Indian context and what is prescribed in most of the university syllabus. M.K. Gandhi's is My Experiments with Truth, where he was trying to talk about and where he was trying to deal with his own experiments with truth. I don't know, how many of us, how many of you would have read My Experiments with Truth fully well. But doing or narrating the experiments with truth, ultimately the product of his experiments with the truth, the net result, one could not find towards the end of the text, except bits and pieces of his own experiences, in the Indian context. In the same Indian context, you have Dr. Ambedkar's is waiting for the visa, which again, I wonder how many of you would have read the Waiting for Visa by Dr. Ambedkar. If you keep both the texts, the first text, My Experiments with Truth of Gandhi, is certainly an idealist version of the autobiographical writing, where when he grows up or when he comes to maturity, there is or he enjoys sufficient space, initiative to transform the existing social norms. But in the realist version, which is Waiting for Visa by Ambedkar, the possibility to change society is near impossible, and the individual has no agency to change the society because he belongs to the marginalized section of the society. So, but then he achieves wholeness by adapting to existing social mores and structures, also by rebelling against, speaking against the existing social mores and customs. So the arduous, agonizing, excruciating journey, both physical and psychological, as Dr. Ambedkar confronts many obstacles, challenges, the dominant norms of the social order he was born into, eventually learns to adapt his desires and aspirations to them. So the journey ends with the hero as fully socialized, normalized, incorporated with members of this society. So there is a problem, there is a serious problem when it comes to the realist version of autobiographical writing, which I call, which I attribute, or which I keep in a separate space called Testimonio, within the frame of Testimonio. Partly because you have the problem of persons belonging to this specific set of a marginalized group, uh, who are expected to follow the dominant norms of the social order. And there is a problem for these intellectuals. There is a problem for any person who belongs to the marginalized, the subaltern group. Uh, Either you have to be, when you try to fracture, when you try to think, different from the dominant norms of the social order, you are doing two things. Number one, you are fracturing the existing social structure, and number two, you are endangering yourself. So nobody will talk to you. Nobody, if you resist the hegemonic force, your own friends will become your enemies, and you will fracture your own self, number one, and you will also endanger yourself, number two, and you will also fracture the existing, the so-called convenient, comfortable zone that is existing when you accept the dominant norm of the social order. So this kind of waiting for visa on one hand as the realist mode of self-writing, and my experiments with Truth of Gandhi as the idealist version of self-writing. one should differentiate and distinguish. Otherwise, if you think that both are autobiographical, then we are again committing a serious, we are involving in a serious betrayal of what you call history writing. So I take up the second important example, which that's the only example which I am going to deal with when I talk about testimonios, which is a very interesting and important testimonial when it comes to the Indian testimonios, which is the Scar, a modern Dalit testimonio by K.A. Gunasekar. The Scar is a text where Gunasekaran was trying to talk about, or he was trying to recount his experience, because in Testimonio you find an eyewitness account of the collective suffering in the first person. Even you find these kinds of testimonials in the West also. In black writing, you find this kind of testimonials. When Langston Hughes was, talking about his experience in a church, he was trying to narrate his own experience in a church where he was writing it in a very subtle but very serious manner. Uh, the church is white, the pulpit is white, the priest is white, the garment which he wears is white, all the people are white, the flowers are white, everything is white in this space, and I am the only black man sitting in this white space. And I feel that this kind of the white I mean a black man sitting in a white space is very disturbing. I feel like a black bug sitting on a white rose. And again he continues the writing the same way, and he ends the writing very significantly when he says, my dear Jesus Christ, as promised, if you come back to this world one fine morning, you come back. You come back. You come back not as a Jew, not as a white, but as a black African Moor. Everything would have changed in this world, but one thing will remain the same. You will be crucified immediately if you turn back as a black African Moor. So this is how he was trying to explicitly express what he felt inside a white dominant religious space. So this kind of a writing is not exactly personal, not exactly subjective, not a journey within oneself. It is certainly not even a form of representing his community or his race. It is a kind of extension of what he felt, what he experienced within a dominant white space. So this kind of an experience is not Langston Hughes's experience. It is not self. It represents, it extends the very psyche of the whole race, the whole community. Likewise, when K. Gunasekaran was talking about his problems, his experiences as a boy, as a grown-up adult, in the Scar, as the title itself, implies, it is a scar. Whatever you felt in your childhood, whatever you received in your childhood as a scar, it is not going to change till you die and even after your death. So it remains a stigma throughout, and K. Gunasekaran could very successfully write about, record whatever he experienced as a Dalit in India. So he was, in one such instance, in a classroom, the school peon once entered, and he asked, how many pariahs are sitting in this class? Come on, raise your hands. Because he wants to identify the pariah students, the SC students, to provide them with scholarships, which can be done, after the classroom, or through the teacher, but he announces in the classroom, and all the pariah students raise their hands, and all the rest of the classroom, um, sees this, and they identify who is the pariah, and subsequently their own behavior towards these boys, their tendency towards these boys, their attitude towards these boys change. And a lot more examples he gives. In another instance, when he was trying to cross a small bund where in a field, he encounters an elderly person belonging to a relatively upper caste coming opposite, and he was staring at this boy, and this boy was trying to give space. Yeah, because it's a very narrow bund, so they have to adjust to cross each other. And seeing this boy giving space without stepping down into the mud, the elderly upper caste man slaps this young boy, and this boy weeps, and he comes back and asks his grandmother, reports this event to his grandma. And instead of blaming it on the upper caste man, elderly man, his grandma was accusing this fellow. When you see an elderly upper caste man, you should have immediately get into the mud, leaving way for such a person. It's your fault. So all these scars collectively, collectively represent the fears, the pain, the poverty, the level of subjugation, the level of discrimination faced by the Dalits of India together. So it is a kind of collective suffering when one talks about one's own suffering. This is how the testimonios become histories. The testimonios become a very important histories. Uh, and similar way, you have the case of Manuel Scavenger when you talk about, when you read Charan Kumar Limbale, Om Prakash Valmiki, there is a manual scavenger who carries human shit on her head in a bamboo basket, and on a rainy day, it drips through the gaps in the bamboo weaving. It drips over her face, and she goes back home, washes herself, and she feeds her children. She writes, "When I feed her children, when I feed my children, I feel not like feeding them food, but with human shit." And she also goes after a buffalo carrying the shit, I mean the dung of the buffalo, and she puts all the collected dung in, she washes it in the running water, collects the segregated undigested grains from the cow dung. She dries it up and prepares gruel and feeds her children. These are all, it's not something very personal, but the personal becomes political and public. And this kind of a thing, and naming the children after great leaders and great, um, the community elders. These are all certain ways in which the subaltern groups or the marginalized groups are trying to reconstruct their history or retain their histories. In the same case, Kudirai Vannans are also trying to reconstruct their history, because nowadays you have all sophisticated washing machines, sophisticated ways of disposing your domestic house wastes. So Kudirai Vannans, used to get into the river around 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the night and the early morning. Then they need to wash the whole village clothes, and they have to get back to their homes before it dawns, before 5 o'clock. So that they won't be viewed, they won't be seen by the relatively upper caste people. So all these experiences of these subaltern groups, you don't find in any other histories. The official histories certainly neglect, certainly ignored, certainly deliberately, deleted, erased the memories and the erased the histories of all these people. So this is, I'll finish in 2 more minutes. So this is the problem of the authentic official histories, And when you, the powerful, the victors, the elites, the socially superior, narrated history as authentic versions of the past, I never asked for a proof and believed it so very blindly. But when we narrate a possible alternate version of the past, the history, the whole world comes down so heavily upon us asking for the proof of the narrative of the common man. As we all know, the world is driven by crowdsourcing, crowdfunding, crowd receiving, the monopolization of history, and leaving no more, gaining power to the receivers is no more. Let the layman like me, like you, let's all crowdsource history with the available riddles, anecdotes, folktales, and even ordinary jokes to fill the deliberate conscious gaps in the so-called official versions of history, which consciously let the powerful sections thrive and prosper, and the common powerless people to carry the recorded histories of slavery quite ignorantly. So let us awake and be historically conscious. Let us not say past is past because past is going to be present and contemporary. Let us reconstruct our memory or our history using our strong memory. Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to respond to it in 2 more minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for your wonderful session. Uh, Dear participants, if you have any questions, you can ask them now.
Good afternoon, Marx, sir. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible. Yes.
Okay. So I'm very happy to be listening to you, Marx, sir. Like you can remember, I am one of your students. I was studying in Pondicherry University,
Oh,
Jimenez Ma'am. Yeah. So I was reminded of sitting in your class during disability studies. Okay, so during that time, I still remember you're talking about autobiographies. I still remember your quote. No, you're repeatedly saying this. The first victim of an autobiography is truth. So that is what you were teaching in the class. It is still echoing in my mind. And when you were talking about the witness narrative, you said witness narratives were having too much pity in it, and they are trying to be, take that emotions out and give that pity out. My question is, sir, what should we look at in a uh, life narrative in the post truth era? Should we look at the truth, or should we understand the seemingly believable truth? What should we look at in the life narratives now?
yeah. Very glad to see you on a virtual platform like this. Well, this is how to view these, life narratives. We cannot seek any truth in these life narratives anymore because we started acknowledging the fact that there is no truth at all. So all kinds of hearsay versions will roam freely in this post-truth world, and some of them were camouflaging themselves as truths. So the only point is our point of contention is to acknowledge all kinds of versions that are available freely in all zones instead of searching for the truth, because in our search for the ultimate truth, we are relegating certain important facts or certain alternate versions to the dustbin, to the trash. So by deleting certain alternate versions to the trash in our search for the so-called authentic version of something, we are certainly doing injustice to the very seemingly trivial, unimportant details in an official historiographic process. So what I wish to state here is, instead of searching for something authentic, why not celebrating the differences in all these versions and then trying to come to a conclusion of what would have happened? Because it's all a guess that we all are making in today's world. There is no absolute truth, there is no fact. But then after listening to some 10 versions of the same incident, we know what would have happened, and that won't really harm the truth as it is, or the reality as it is. So when we read a life narrative, it's very important to not just to look at the mainstream facts or the mainstream incidents, but also to look at the trivial signs, the trivial markers here and there, so that we can have more of what had happened in the past. A very good example is the jealous, which Arun Shori was trying to talk about, the statues, the number of statues of Ambedkar outnumbering the number of statues of Gandhi. Outwardly, people may think that it is true. While it is true, one should also understand that these all the statues of Gandhi have been installed by the or with the state funds, but the statues, nearly 70% of the statues of Ambedkar have been installed only by people themselves, with the funding of the public, not with the state funds. So this is how certain seemingly unimportant, trivial, traces here and there would help us understand what exactly is the reality.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mark, sir. Once again, very happy to listen to you.
Yeah, very, very happy to see you. Yeah, thank you.
Because of want of time, I'm sorry to state that our session, we will be ending this plenary session. It is indeed a great privilege to propose a vote of thanks on this first plenary session of the two-day virtual national conference on the story, life narratives of experience, memory, identity, and agency. I thank Dr. T. Marx, Professor of English, Pondicherry University, for giving us his precious time to enlighten us with testimonials as social history. He has provided us with insights into the topic and also revealed to us interesting facts on the evolution of testimonials and the shifts in historiography. So we cannot thank you enough for the knowledge that you've imparted to us on this session. You have inspired us to rethink on the importance and validity of testimonials in their varied forms as social history. We apologize that we have to move on for want of time, but it will not be wrong to say that each of us has it will not be wrong to say that through your discussion, we have come to realize that each of us has the capability to become great sources of testimonials just as well. We wish you the best as you continue to touch the lives of your students and as you continue to inspire young minds with your wisdom and experience. I also wish to express my sincerest gratitude to all the participants of this plenary session. Kindly be informed that this session will be followed by paper presentations at 3 concurrent venues. I will hereby end my vote of thanks with warmest invitation to all to be with us and attend the upcoming sessions as well. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you.